Church Incorporated: The Political and Economic Exploitation of Jesus in America. Introduction. In the American imagination, Jesus Christ stands as a sacred figure, a teacher of compassion, sacrifice, and redemption. Yet in practice, his name and image have been repeatedly mobilized not only for spiritual guidance but also for worldly profit and political power. What emerges is something that can only be called Church Incorporated, a fusion of faith, politics, and commerce in which religion operates less as a matter of the soul and more as an industry and electoral machine. This essay examines how Jesus has been exploited for economic and political purposes in the United States. It traces the historical entanglement of church and state, analyzes the rise of the religious right, explores the commercialization of Christianity through megachurches and media empires, and assesses the consequences for democracy and faith itself. Ultimately, it argues that the transformation of Christianity into Church Incorporated risks hollowing out both civic life and spiritual life, leaving behind a marketplace of religion rather than a community of faith. The historical foundations of Church Incorporated: The American Paradox. The United States was constitutionally founded on the separation of church and state. Yet the cultural reality has always leaned heavily on religion, particularly Protestant Christianity. The Puritans envisioned America as a city upon a hill, a nation chosen by God to be a moral example. Later, the Founding Fathers incorporated religious language into public discourse, even while establishing legal secularism. This paradox, secular in law, religious in culture, provided fertile ground for the intertwining of Jesus with national identity. Over time, Jesus became not only a spiritual figure but also a cultural icon enlisted to legitimize political authority. Civil religion. Scholars describe this phenomenon as American civil religion, a national faith that blends patriotism with religious devotion. Presidents routinely invoke God in their speeches, national symbols carry religious references, and public life is suffused with faith. Within this civil religion, Jesus is less a figure of the Gospels than a brand representing moral legitimacy. Jesus in politics: The rise of the religious right mobilizing the Christian vote. The late 20th century saw a dramatic politicization of Christianity, particularly among evangelicals. Leaders like Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson mobilized believers into a formidable voting bloc under the banner of the moral majority. They reframed civic participation as spiritual warfare. Casting ballots was not simply political engagement but obedience to God's will. Presidential campaigns and Jesus from Ronald Reagan's portrayal of America as the shining city upon a hill to George W. Bush's declaration that Jesus was his favorite philosopher. Politicians have repeatedly invoked Jesus to signal legitimacy. Even Donald Trump, whose lifestyle diverged from evangelical ideals, was embraced by many as a divinely chosen instrument. In each case, Jesus functioned as a campaign symbol, granting candidates access to a loyal religious electorate. Partisan appropriation. This strategy reduces Jesus to a partisan tool. Rather than a universal figure of love and justice, he is framed as endorsing specific policies and candidates. The effect is to sanctify partisan divides, transforming political disputes into cosmic battles between good and evil. The economics of Church Incorporated: Faith as industry alongside politics. Jesus has become central to a vast religious economy. Christianity in America is not only a faith but also an industry worth billions. Publishing houses churn out Christian bestsellers marketed as essential guides. Religious films, television, and music build global audiences. Merchandise, t-shirts, jewelry, bumper stickers turns Jesus into a lifestyle brand. Megachurches and media empires. Megachurches epitomize Church Incorporated. With congregations numbering in the tens of thousands, multi-million-dollar budgets, and sprawling campuses with cafes and bookstores, They resemble corporations more than churches. Their leaders often command personal wealth rivaling that of CEOs, funded by donations, ticketed events, and media sales. The prosperity gospel. At the core of this commercialization lies the prosperity gospel, a theology that equates faith with financial success. Televangelists promise blessings in exchange for seed offerings, amassing fortunes while preaching that Jesus guarantees material prosperity. This doctrine transforms salvation into a transaction and Jesus into a guarantor of wealth. Tax privileges and wealth accumulation. Churches enjoy tax exemptions that facilitate enormous wealth accumulation. Critics argue that these exemptions often benefit organizations functioning as businesses rather than charities. Church Incorporated thus operates with economic advantages unavailable to secular corporations. V. The political economy of faith religion as electoral capital. For politicians, invoking Jesus secures votes. For religious leaders, endorsing candidates provides political influence. The relationship is transactional. Politicians gain access to religious legitimacy, while religious leaders gain access to political power. Reinforcing through commerce. The economic commercialization of Jesus reinforces his political mobilization. A Christian voter who attends church may also consume Christian media, purchase faith-branded products, and donate to campaigns endorsed by their pastor. The economy of faith sustains the politics of faith, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. Foo. Consequences of Church Incorporated polarization and culture. Wars. When Jesus becomes a partisan figure, he deepens polarization. Opponents are cast not merely as political rivals, but as enemies of God. This transforms political disagreement into existential struggle, fueling culture wars that fracture the nation. Erosion of religious pluralism. Church Incorporated marginalizes non-Christian citizens, implicitly suggesting that true Americanness requires adherence to a specific form of Christianity. This erodes the pluralistic foundation of democracy, alienating religious minorities and secular Americans alike. Hollowing of spiritual life commercialization reduces faith to consumer habits. Worship is measured by attendance numbers and donation totals, while devotion is expressed through purchases rather than spiritual practices. Jesus becomes a brand to be marketed rather than a radical teacher to be followed. Threats to democracy. When policies are justified in the name of God, dissent becomes not debate, but heresy. Religious authority displaces democratic deliberation, undermining both civic equality and constitutional freedoms. Siu. Counter-movements and resistance. Reclaiming Jesus for justice. Many Christian communities resist the commodification and politicization of Jesus. Liberation theologians emphasize his message of compassion and solidarity with the poor. Progressive Christians frame their faith around justice rather than profit or power. Reclaiming Jesus from Church Incorporated. Defending church-state separation scholars and activists continue to argue for a stricter separation of church and state, not to diminish faith but to preserve its integrity. They maintain that religion thrives best when independent from political machinery and economic exploitation. Grassroots renewal, local congregations, and interfaith coalitions work to recenter faith on humility, service, and compassion. These movements remind believers that Jesus himself overturned the tables of money changers, rejecting the fusion of sacred devotion with economic exploitation. Conclusion. The phenomenon of Church Incorporated reveals the extent to which Jesus has been instrumentalized in American life. Politicians use his image to secure votes. Entrepreneurs commodify his name to generate wealth. Together, these practices transform Christianity into a hybrid of electoral machine and economic empire. The consequences are profound: deepened polarization, diminished pluralism, hollowed spiritual life, and weakened democracy. Yet alternatives remain. Across the country, Believers and communities are reclaiming Jesus not as a partisan mascot or commercial brand, but as a source of justice, compassion, and humility. For the health of both democracy and religion, America must resist the lure of Church Incorporated. The separation of church and state is not merely a constitutional safeguard, but also a spiritual necessity. Only by disentangling Jesus from political and economic exploitation can the nation preserve the integrity of both its civic institutions and its religious traditions.